Hi, welcome to another discussion on street sociology. Now today we're tackling a topic that is pretty close to my heart, which is kind of why I haven't really addressed it yet. It can be a little hard to maintain one's balance on issues that we have a deep emotional investment in, but I think it's time to have this discussion. The impetus for this being the arrest or the detention of Mr. Novak Djokovic, the tennis player, in Australian immigration detention. Now, I'm not here to really discuss the machinations around his alleged... he got a pass because he said he'd had COVID before and it got really murky bureaucratically, but we're not really here to talk about that. The key is that he was placed in something called the Park Hotel in Carlton, which is a very nice way of describing a prison for refugees. And our the way that we handle refugees in Australia is pretty much the issue here. When Mr. Djokovic was in the hotel with the other refugees, this brought a great deal of media attention to his detention. It brought a little attention to the detention of everyone else who'd been there, but mostly him being his celebrity status. But we need to look deeper here. There are gentlemen, men and women, I guess, in detention in that hotel who have been there for 9 years in various detention places. Now they're at the hotel. 9 years. Now, if you get convicted of a crime, in this case, you'd imagine quite a serious violent crime, in Australia, you might get 9 years prison. You don't get prison for no crime. Now, our policy of refugee detention is very punitive. So if people come to Australia, let's say by boat, as refugees from danger, we collect them at sea. We either turn them around at sea, which is quite literally illegal under the United Nations laws of the seas to which we're a signatory. We either do that, or we detain these people, we put them in offshore detention, and through years and years and years of political wrangling, they might be able to be put onshore again in detention. And the government's reason for doing these illegal acts is apparently to deter people coming to Australia by boat as refugees. First and foremost, that program actually doesn't work. The government made it very difficult for the press to actually discuss the arrival of any boats at all a few years ago, but they still come. This is a punitive form of punishment that Australia wields around the world as don't come here, look what'll happen. But it's cruel, it doesn't work, it's unnecessary. By the way, it's costing us over 2 billion Australian dollars a year to run this thing. Okay? Now, this is a real problem. When refugees come to, let's say, any other country at all in the Western world, they are assessed for their refugee status, if they are genuine refugees who are fleeing from harm in their home countries or not. Now, here's a fun fact. Aussies like to say, well, they're illegals, they're economic migrants, they should go home, this and that. Well, guess what? Over 80% of Australia's currently detained refugees have been found by the Australian government to be genuine refugees, which means they're coming from actual harm and cannot be returned home because they'll probably be either killed or tortured. So they are genuine refugees, which means we have to accept them. Not just legally, which we do, but morally. Why wouldn't we? If these people are proven, demonstrated to have good character, good criminal, clean criminal records or whatever, and fleeing genuine harm, it would be of benefit to Australia to bring them in the community and allow them to work. Not lock them up for 9 years. You cannot lock people up for years with no crime. All they wanted to do was escape persecution. So under the United Nations law, what Australia is doing at the moment, and has been for 9 years, is actually illegal. It's inhumane and it doesn't work in fact, and it's also very expensive. Now, on paper, this is to secure the impenetrable fortress of Australia's borders, but it's not. That's a lie. Where do you think most of Australia's illegal immigration comes from? Like the vast majority of our illegal alien foreigners here. White Europeans and Americans who come here and overstay their visas by years. That's by far the vast majority of Australia's problem with illegal immigration, is people from first world Western countries coming here and overstaying their visas. That's the real problem. But we never hear that in the press, do we? No. We hear about there's some kind of brown people and there's some kind of danger and we don't want dangerous refugees. Oh no. What they're really saying is we pretty much want white ones. Now, let me furnish you with a personal anecdote, right? So we can humanise this bureaucratic bullshit into something we can understand as a human being. All right? There ain't no one out here in immigration rounding up all the white people from other countries who overstayed their visa. No, we stop them at the border, and they're usually brown. Right? For example, when Australia, during the Syrian civil war, Australia had a very special, peaceable thing where we accepted a bunch of Syrian refugees, but only the Christian ones. Do you see where I'm going with this? I'll give you an example. Anecdote. The first time I was living in Sweden, I became friends with a man named Mohammed, a young man about my age. He's far smarter than me, had an MBA from the American University in Beirut, a bunch of other training. He used to work for HSBC at the bank. And he was a great man, and we used to hang out all the time. We would smash the FIFA 2010. I sucked at it, but I didn't care. We did language classes together. Great dude. His wife, great person. And they welcomed me into their home, and we hung out as dudes, you know, just hanging out. Could I, if I was in charge of the Australian border situation, especially in the times where we're only accepting Christian refugees, could I look him and his wife in the eye after all the good they did for me as human beings and say, no, you're not welcome in my country? No. But if they try to come here on a visa, I goddamn will guarantee you it'll be a hell of a lot harder for them than it would let's say, a much paler person from that part of the world. Do you know what I mean? And when you put this in a box and say, oh, they're coming here, they're refugees, they're economic migrants, they just want our money, that's you copping out the easy way. Because if you actually spoke to even one of these people face to face and you realise the human behind it, if you have a soul, you probably would let them in too. We cannot discriminate based on race or religion or part of the world they come from, not just because it's morally and legally wrong, but we're doing Australia a disservice. The more people that can come here, working people who come here genuinely and want to contribute to the country, the stronger the country gets. All this is to say, why did no one care until a famous Serbian tennis player ended up in the detention centre? No one cares as human beings have been there 9 years with no charge. Oh no, a famous guy had to eat potatoes in a hotel. Let's just fling the world media at it. What I'm trying to say is this. Australia has a uniquely terrible system of immigration. Telling you about, we've got people in 9 years. These people were found within the first year to be genuine refugees fleeing harm that needed to be taken care of. But we spend billions of your money flittering them around offshore detention or various terrible prisons in Australia, such as the Park Hotel. And for what? Political grandstanding? The punitive punishment of innocent people to make our country seem less attractive? I'm sure it's achieved that. Let's think about this. 9 years in detention. Let's take the example of a random Western country that isn't us. France, that's a good one. Do you know how long you have to be, like the longest period of time that you can be in immigration detention in France before you have to have had all your refugee documents assessed and you're either genuine refugee, allowed straight into the community to integrate, or kicked out? 3 months. In fact, I believe earlier it was 6 weeks. That's how long it takes, in or out. Here, genuine refugees, 9 years in detention for no crime, and they're not getting let out. So the problem isn't that Novak Djokovic screwed up his visa and had to eat some bad food in a dodgy hotel. The problem is everybody else who's been stuck there for no crime. Mr. Djokovic lied on his visa application and got deported. Well, what's the crime of the genuine refugees who are in the Park Hotel? None. So let's think about it. Australia does run a genuinely, uniquely terrible detention system for refugees. And it's not going to change, you know, because the world's media turns up for a couple of days and goes, oh, look, a famous person had it bad. It's going to change by us not voting for people who carry this out. Now, that's difficult given that both the Labor and Liberal parties both contribute and work towards building our legal system of offshore and punitive punishment detention. I'm not saying you should vote for the Great Australia Party or any other mob. Well, I can't really recommend any parties anyway from the point of bias, but we've got to make a voice. We've got to consider. It's easy to put these people in a box and say, I don't really know what happens to those people, so I don't want to think about it. Well, maybe we should, because it's our country and our name too. And how we treat the people who have the least is indicative of how we treat everyone else. We need to think about that. Street sociology.